Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd before 2025 rolls in, hitting you with one more last final best of the year video. In this one, it's essentially Austen and I sucking ourselves off. Can I say that on camera on YouTube? Talking about what we both felt between each of us was our best content of the year in terms of Fantano uploads and reviews. Now, before I get into all of this, I want to do a quick shout out to our sponsor for this video, the good people over at Discogs. Here we go. Hi. I'm professional music addict Anthony Fantano. If you haven't noticed, I've been collecting vinyl records here for quite a while now, well over a decade in fact. But even if you're just getting started, Discogs.com and the Discogs app is an awesome resource. I've got my collection more or less cataloged here, which not just keeps me organized, but also helps me track the value of my records. That's how I know my first pressing of Death Grips' Ex-Military is worth as much as your firstborn child. It's so easy to buy and sell music on the Discogs platform in a wide range of formats, or want list stuff that you're looking to pick up later. It's also a great place to discover some hidden gems too, be it through Discogs albums lists or by just commiserating with fellow music nerds and collectors. It's literally a whole database of music history right in front of you. The power of the music internet at its absolute finest. So give Discogs.com and the Discogs app a try down below via the D-Box link and let me know how you like it. And the video continues. Let me first shout out a bunch of Fantano content that Austen and I were quite happy with this year. Austen's picks for this list were the videos where I talked about albums that I could beat in a fight. There was also my review of Corey Feldman's Joker song, where he essentially paints his music as being some kind of self-aware gag where he has like tricked us into feeling the way we feel about it. The joke is on you! What can I say? Corey Feldman, he joked me off on this one, that's for sure. To further prove our perversions, Austen has also listed our video where I ranked poop bars. Yes, any and all bars that landed on whatever records that deal in poop, feces, shit. Austen also listed the video where we addressed Rick Beato, talking about the current state of music and people's interest in music and so on and so forth, which I still disagree with that content heavily. Then we also put out an excellent and very fun video this year featuring Emily Harpist, where I tried playing harp for the first time, and that stuff was all around great. As far as picks that I would throw into the list for the best Fantano videos of the year, that would be my Joker 2 review. It was a musical, so I mean, it kind of made sense as a piece of content for this channel. Also, the lengthy conversation that the great FD Signifier and I had about context and understanding the deeper meanings of the music and songs that we listen to and why it's lost on so many people. Also, the video Austen and I put together titled Seriously, where I talk about the lack of seriousness in a lot of music discourse on the internet and social media these days. Also, the reacts to various awful songs that I come across via my Instagram Reels feed. And then finally, that weird debate that I had with that YouTuber, Dupley, who was not very happy with me over not taking Kanye's latest album cycles too seriously. And while they did not land on the Fantano channel per se, I do want to give a shout out to the very well-viewed and intense and high-stakes live reactions that I did to all of the Drake and Kendrick disses this year. Let's move on to the reviews, though. 5 that I've chosen, 5 that Austen has chosen, and why. Austen's first pick is going to be my review of the new MGMT album, with Austen saying, I'll preface my thoughts here by saying that the way I go over reviews day to day is kind of clinical and checklisty by design. I'm pretty much just looking to make sure there aren't any verbal typos or editing errors. I don't really like music reviews in general, to be honest. Damn, Austen's in like the wrong line of work. I'm basically torturing Austen every day of her life every time I send a review along. But there are still a handful of reviews Anthony sends me every year where I will be like, this struck me as your best review in a while, bro. That is true. Sometimes those words are texted back to me. And this was one of those instances. It just seemed like Anthony was in his bag for this vid. He did well contextualizing the album in the band's discography and conveying his passion for the album. On that note, it was nice to see so much excite him this year. That is true. You know, the thing is like, part of me feels like I was super positive this year as far as like my overall reviews. There were a lot of records on my loved list this year, and I couldn't like honorably mention every one of them. I couldn't have every single one of them in my top 50. But like going back and looking at those records, I don't regret loving any one of them. Like there was just like a lot of music that I thought was great this year. 2024 was just a super saturated year for both good and bad stuff. Okay, the first review I want to contribute to the best reviews of the year list for me personally would be my double Taylor Swift, the Tortured Poets Department review. Like, not only was I super thorough in my criticisms of the Taylor Swift album, but I was also like with a fine-tooth comb going over the various points and narrative bits that are being sung about in each song, kind of making the case for how self-absorbed and narcissistic the album is. I broke the review up into two parts because I was afraid of people just sort of like looking at the score and then kind of ignoring what I was saying in totality for both projects. So I ended up like sneaking my score into the second part of the review. I ended up kind of linking them together with like a really silly Cal skit that I think was honestly one of the funniest Cal skits that's ever been on this channel. And even if I didn't like the Taylor Swift album, I can at least say I came away from it with a lot to discuss, which, you know, as a reviewer, as somebody who's critiquing things, I feel like maybe the worst possible compliment you can give something is that it's terrible or that it's not worthy of note, and you just really have nothing to say as to why. Austen also wants to shout out my review for the new Ka album, The Thief Next to Jesus, an album that I highly recommend for sure. It landed in my top 10, and Austen points out this particular review, saying this one appealed to me for reasons similar to the MGMT, but what's more is that Ka's album also became one of my favorites this year, and I checked it out directly because of Anthony's commentary. It's a thematically dense work with a lot to unpack, and I think Anthony did so with a lot of nuance and grace. I've also gotten a lot out of going back to Ka's previous work, especially Hermit and the Recluse. That's such a fire album. Got that one on vinyl too. It's so good. And would encourage anyone watching to do the same. Rest in peace, Ka. Fully agree with that. My next pick for this list is going to be my review for Logic's Ultra 85, a review that particularly I'm proud of because I feel like this album in particular sits in a very interesting place in Logic's discography. I feel like it's going to be a difficult album to pitch to people who aren't necessarily used to Logic's style or sound or have been like riding with him up until this point. But for those who are kind of like familiar with Logic's life story in terms of what he's put out on interviews or on previous records, this album is a really like gratifying listen and journey. It puts a lot of things in perspective and shows him reaching like a new level of self-awareness and maturity too. And in terms of like your usual Logic tropes, lyrically and with you know, the various skits throughout the record with you know, the two spaceship guys, that's all done to a level that it never has been before on previous Logic projects. It just sort of goes to show that like as he has been putting out more material and changing up his sound and doing different things over the course of his career, he's simultaneously been fine-tuning this one like type of album, this one type of album craft, and he's just kind of like reached a peak with it on this record, and it really just kind of gave me a lot to go over, a lot to talk about, and yeah, again, you know, a lot of interesting revelations on this album in terms of like Logic's emotional state and his love of certain types of media and how that sort of like, you know, helped him cope with dealing with the darkest times in his life. He's not just simply a fanboy, but somebody
who historically has used media as a refuge from the worst things happening to him. Whether he intended for that to be the case or not, that in and of itself is like a concept of sorts, and he pulls it off fantastically on this record. Okay, Austen's next contribution to this list, next recommendation, is going to be my Vultures 2 review. She says, not gonna lie, I didn't even know about either Vultures video on the Needle Drop channel until they were already up. Anthony just ran them both on his own, which is fine because he cooked anyway. It's funny, when I read that for the first time, I kind of forgot that I did both Vultures reviews by myself in terms of like writing them, shooting them, editing them. I didn't even ask anybody to check them or anything. I just like really wanted to communicate what I wanted to communicate with like little to no filter or interruption or anything like that. I would say the first Vultures review, it was done mostly out of frustration because the album and the album cycle surrounding it and all the context I talk about in that review was so aggravating and frustrating that I really did truly feel like reviewing the album was pointless. And I still feel that way right now. But then after I saw the even more frustrating reaction to that video, I took full control over the Vultures 2 video, which, mind you, part of what made that review so interesting is that I put it out before Vultures 2 even existed. And there were numerous comments on the video and on social media when Vultures 2 did actually come out, talking about how my Vultures 2 parody song in the video actually wasn't that far off. My third pick for this video is going to be my review for Eminem's The Death of Slim Shady. And again, I enjoyed reviewing this record, even though I didn't enjoy the album itself, and I enjoyed, pulling my review together, and I think I did pretty great. Considering like how many layers there were to this album, or implied layers, which I then had to kind of pull apart and just sort of say, hey, like this album is kind of telling us it has a concept it doesn't really fully follow through on, even with Eminem being typically as lyrical and as thoughtful and as thorough as he can be. And again, I think he wanted to sort of like, convey the idea that he's giving us that Eminem once again on this record. I still feel like there weren't really a lot of fans contending with the fact that like the execution of the implied concept was half-assed and frankly rushed. I think I did a pretty effective job at illustrating why exactly that was on the record. Austen, in her list over here, also wanted to shout out the GNX review. She says that the review that I did was impressive in terms of the scope and all the backstory that had to be addressed, which, yeah, I mean, it's not often I bust out a 30-minute review on my main channel, but like, I feel like we just had a lot to discuss on the Kendrick review, which again, when it was like all kind of said and done, I was a little blown away that the review was as long as it was, because I feel like GNX and Kendrick's catalog is a pretty straightforward album that you don't really need to sort of dig through all the layers of necessarily. But again, with the Drake beef and all the LA references and some of the headier tracks on the album, there actually was like a lot to discuss and contextualize for this album cycle with Kendrick. So, it was just a joy and a pleasure to do that on this review as well. Next review, I want to say I personally feel like I put a lot into and was very excited to put out there was my review for More Mothers, The Great Bailout. This was not only a very mystifying and strange and otherworldly album from like a vocal standpoint, from an instrumental standpoint, but this album conceptually was truly a record that like got me to do some serious digging in terms of its concept and in terms of its storytelling in regards to the commentary that More Mother brings on this album to the African diaspora and England hundreds of years ago, formally outlawing slavery, which historically speaking is usually framed as a pretty benevolent action on their part. But More Mother, through the music on this album and the storytelling on it, essentially shows us how those who were freed around this time were essentially shafted once again and still treated like property, as there was no real legal retribution for the injustice they suffered through, and instead the slave owners and holders were made whole by the government. That and much more is sort of gone through on this great great bailout album that, again, I highly recommend. Austen also wanted to shout out my review for the Godspeed You Black Emperor album, the no title one, with her saying it was my best review of the year. Regardless of what anyone says, I did engage with the music, even on a formal level, which I would agree I did, maybe not to the same extent that I do albums where I don't talk about the context around the music or what's influencing it historically per se. But I did actually talk about like many of the compositional elements of the songs on the record. I think a lot of the criticisms essentially talking about like, oh, all you did was like talk about Palestine the entire review. Number one, not only is that the exact thing that Godspeed is trying to bring fucking attention to with this album, you moron, but on top of it, I feel like a lot of those sentiments have come from people who have essentially decided for whatever reason that this genocide happening over there right now is unimportant on some level and not worthy of any real attention. Then finally, the last review that I want to shout out in this video would be my coverage of Charlie XCX's Brat, my album of the year. Stellar record, amazing album cycle, and it was just a record that I feel like was exciting to review on multiple levels, not only in terms of Charlie sort of being an artist who I've covered the highs and lows of across her career, and there was a lot of context and, previous record sort of discussion to bring into the review, or at least like take account of before really analyzing or understanding fully what made Brat so great artistically. You also had a very interesting album promotion cycle that led up to the record as well. And then the third thing that I think made reviewing Brat interesting was just the music was frickin' fire. The choruses, the production, the vocal performances, just really everything about it was killer, 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 which is obviously why it ended up being my album of the year and my pop album of the year. And there you have it. I think that is going to be it for this video. Those are my and Austen's favorite reviews of 2024, other Fantano content as well. Let me know what you guys thought some of the best content I did in 2024 was. Let's have our fingers be crossed and hope that we have a fucking amazing 2025. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, 2024 videos best forever.